Good evening. Welcome to the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education General Meeting of October 17th, 2022. Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Acosta.
Here.
Mrs. Bonifield is absent tonight. Mr. Centers?
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mrs. Bradford says here. President Burton?
Here. We have a quorum. Mrs. Jarvis, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Yes. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and welcome to everyone who's here with us this evening. Welcome to those of you who are watching from home. This evening's meeting is a regular meeting or a general meeting, or some call it a voting meeting. What you can expect this evening is perhaps not as much discussion on the items that are coming before the Board of Education as you might expect. But that is because the items that the board votes on this evening have been typically brought to the board for during at least two previous meetings, during which we basically beat them to death. We question and answer, and we get a lot of deep discussion. If you are looking for a lot of detailed information about some of these items that we will be voting on throughout the evening, I suggest that you tune back into the Committee of the Whole meetings. You can watch them, going forward here, or from this point. If you're looking for any prior Committee of the Whole meetings for previous discussions, you can find those on our website, and that's at livoniapublicschools.org. If you hover over the board tab, you can drop down to board meeting information, and there you can find videos of all of our previous meetings, and you can get a lot of detailed information about any of these items that the board is going to be voting on. In that same place, you can find copies of our agendas. So if you're watching from home, again, you can be finding that agenda on our website at livoniapublicschools.org. Hover over that board tab, and board meeting information will take you to the agendas. If you're here with us this evening and you'd like an agenda, they can be found just outside the door to my left. The white sheets are agendas. There will also be a stack of blue slips for audience communications if anyone would like to participate in audience communications this evening. We will be taking a break this evening after item 3B, which is district update from the superintendent. We'll take a 5 or 10 minute recess so those who are present this evening can congratulate our honorees of the evening. One of the character traits that we teach to all of our kids in our schools is respect, and that starts with this Board of Education. You have our commitment that we will treat one another and everyone who comes before this Board of Education with respect, and we ask that everyone who's participating this evening do the same. We are very, very proud of our community in Livonia Public Schools, our student community and our adult community, that we practice this on a very regular basis. Makes everyone's lives so much better, and we find that there's no better way to teach our kids than by that example. And we have some exciting communities with character information coming up very quickly in our meeting this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Jenkins. We are at item 3, communications, and 3A is points of pride, recognition of Churchill students. Hang on a second, we've got a motion. Thank you. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolutions recognizing the heroic efforts of Churchill High School students Chase Adams, Colin Anderson, and Ethan Morshey on August 29th, 2022, when they helped rescue residents from a house fire.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Acosta. Okay, terrific. And I will turn it over to Mrs. Jenkins.
Thank you. Good evening, President Burton, members of the board, Superintendent Oquist. Tonight it is my pleasure to bring our latest Points of Pride story to our board and to our community, and it's a super cool Points of Pride this time. As you may have heard or read in local media, our very own Churchill High School has not one, not two, but 3 heroes in its midst. We could not be more proud of the brave actions of 3 Churchill Chargers, Chase Adams, Colin Anderson, and Ethan Morshey, for their heroic actions on the afternoon of August 29th. These 3 friends, well, at this time, I'm going to signal them to make the long journey to the podium to join me as I speak about them. Come on up, guys. You can just line right up there, that's fine. Thanks. These three friends were driving down Ellen Street in Livonia when they noticed smoke coming from a garage and a home. They were the first to see and the first to act on behalf of the residents who occupied the home. Instead of continuing on their way, these three young men stopped, exited their vehicle, and ran to the home. Without hesitation, they knocked on the doors and called 911. Ethan and Chase found an unlocked door and heard the residents calling from inside the house. They fearlessly entered the home and guided the residents to safety, while Colin stood watch in the front yard waiting for the fire crews to arrive. In a Detroit News article, Livonia Fire and Rescue Chief Robert Jennison said the following: "We couldn't be more proud of these young men who remained calm, did the right thing, and were directly responsible for saving the lives of two of their neighbors. They could have just driven by, but instead they decided to take action and stop this incident from becoming a tragedy resulting in loss of life." Thankfully, there were no injuries, and their actions will forever be remembered by the residents, their families, and our entire community. They certainly had a story to share as they started school the following week at Churchill High School. Ethan, raise your hand, Ethan. Ethan is a sophomore and a multi-sport athlete who plays baseball, wrestles, and is on the cross-country team. He has expressed interest in possibly pursuing a career in firefighting. Chase, middle here. Chase is a junior. He plays hockey for Churchill, and Colin is also a junior, and he plays varsity soccer at Churchill. According to their families, these three are like brothers, and their families are very close friends as well. Chase's mom, Julie, who happens to be a PE and health teacher at Holmes Middle School and Johnson Upper Elementary, said they could not be more proud of their actions, but admitted that it's scary to think of the dangers they faced during the rescue. Their families have joined us here tonight, and it is my pleasure to express our appreciation with a special resolution that has been prepared for Chase, Colin, and Ethan. If I could please ask President Burton to join us at the podium to read this special resolution into the record.
Good evening, folks. Whereas the trustees of the Board of Education are desirous of recognizing and promoting good character shown by students in this school district, and whereas Churchill High School students Chase Adams, Colin Anderson, and Ethan Morshea displayed the core elements of the district's communities with character traits that are emphasized in this school district each and every day, and whereas Chase, Colin, and Ethan noticed smoke coming from a home on Ellen Street and without hesitation stopped to call 911, knocked on the doors, and assisted the residents to exiting safely from the home. And whereas by their actions, Chase, Colin, and Ethan showed selfless courage and compassion on the afternoon of August 29th, 2022, and were commended by the Livonia Fire and Rescue Department for their actions. Now therefore, be it resolved that the trustees of the Livonia Board of Education do hereby recognize Chase Adams, Colin Anderson, and Ethan Morshea for their heroic efforts, which likely helped save the lives of the residents. Congratulations, folks. One thing I do want to mention also, there was a lot of media recognition about these three young men, and every time they said the same thing: we just did what everybody else would do. But on that afternoon, that wasn't true, because there was a Ring doorbell from the residents across the street, and we could see video of the whole thing, and 3 other cars of adults and 1 other employment vehicle drove past, slowed down, looked, and drove on. So it is what everybody should do, but it's not what everybody does. But it is what you guys did. And we are so very, very, very proud of you. We couldn't possibly be more grateful than the families involved, but know that we are so proud that you emulate exactly what your parents have taught you from day one and what we as a school district are honored to come alongside and reinforce. So thanks very much and congratulations.
I invited them to speak, but they've walked away. Anyway, I thought that they had worked this out ahead of time, but it was a game of this, pointing at each other, so. Going
Do
once,
you guys
going
have anything
twice?
you'd like to share?
We're good, okay. All right, well, thank you.
Mrs. Oquist, would you like to add anything?
I would, thank you. And could we also just acknowledge each of the parents who are here with us this evening as well? Because these are things that begin from when our children are born and that we instill in them all the way through. So a round of applause, please, for your parents as well. It is, and courage is such a tremendous trait. And to have the combination of courage and heart, and just the wherewithal to act in the way that you did is beyond impressive. That would be something that many adults would hesitate to do. And I can understand certainly when your parents probably expressed, what were you thinking in some ways, right? Just from a parent's safety standpoint. But I'm sure their hearts just swelled with pride knowing that you had that combination of heart and courage and wherewithal to act on behalf of others around you. And that's really what is foundational in our world, in the way we treat one another, is that we care about others, others before self, and you emulated that so perfectly. So we're so tremendously proud of you. We appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us this evening. Thank you. I'll turn it over to any of my board colleagues.
Are there any other board members who would like to make any comments this evening?
Great job.
Absolutely. Congratulations, folks. We are so proud of you. We are going to cover one other item before we take a brief, I'm sorry, we do. We have a motion we need to vote on, don't we? We have a motion, motion by President Burton, supported by Mrs. Acosta, in recognition of Churchill High School students. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Yes. President Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes.
And the motion passes. Congratulations again, folks. The next item on our agenda is our district update from the superintendent, and afterward, we will have a brief break. Mrs. Acosta?
Thank you so.
Yeah, not Mrs. Acosta, Mrs. Oquist.
Got it. Thanks so much, President Burton. So we are going to pull that up on the screen and share some other highlights. It is a great way to begin our meeting. And so we're going to start with a little bit about Project Lead the Way. So Project Lead the Way is certainly not new to our Board of Education and to many of our schools in our community. But this year, we started a pilot program, and at 3 of our elementary schools, at Hayes, Hoover, and Randolph, we have students engaged at the K-4 level in this amazing STEM curriculum. So the concept of science, technology, engineering, and math. Project Lead the Way is the name of the curriculum. It really is the gold standard in STEM pathway. And as you know, one of the goals of the board and of the district is to build a K-12 and beyond STEM pathway for our students who are interested in that. And so we have some pictures here of students at Hoover Elementary. It is considered the 5th special class for these 3 schools. And again, we are piloting it. And we have 3 teachers who have taken on this challenge. And the students here are building a car which will carry an egg down a ramp. So not something you see every day, but they are engaged, and we are so proud that in just a few weeks, actually, Hayes Elementary, is that correct? Yep. Hayes Elementary will be actually hosting folks from outside the district who are interested in bringing Project Lead the Way to their school district or to their schools and growing their STEM pathway. And so even though we've only been underway for just several weeks, the company has been so impressed with the work that that created this program, that with the work that's being done in Livonia, that they're bringing guests here to see that in action at Hayes next month. So we're looking forward to that. So a huge thank you to our leaders and to our members of our cabinet team and these 3 teachers for really paving the way for us. And of course, we already have a STEM pathway that has been built at middle school and high school, and those teachers have certainly just taken off with that program. So we have lots of learning going on in the district. We have some other projects happening here at Hoover Elementary, some teamwork, which we know always makes things happen. And music class, there is nothing better than the drums and a little bit of percussion options there. We'll move on to students in our life skills class at Western Wayne Skills Center. They are always doing something interesting and really engaging. And so here they're going through the process of peeling and processing the apples and cooking them and turning it into applesauce. And our staff there at the Western Wayne Skills Center do tremendous things in the area of life skills to expose our students age 18 to 26 with a lot of those different experiences. We're going to continue to take a look at some different learning happening at Buchanan Elementary and all throughout LPS. So sometimes that involves technology, a lot of times it involves a partner or two, and we see our students exploring learning and growing each and every day. If you have been on any type of social media related to Livonia Public Schools or our schools in the district, you know Color Run fun is being had everywhere. And so many of our schools, as part of their PTA fundraisers or school fundraisers, are doing fun runs. It's a fun and healthy way to go through the fundraising process. And so I believe here we have Hayes Elementary that just created a cloud of color, and they led their students through a color fun run. And one of the reasons we wanted to share this is, again, to just a huge thank you to parents and grandparents who for many years I know have purchased anything from wrapping paper to pizza kits and everything else. And so many of our schools have taken the route of the fun run, and we just are overwhelmed with the generosity of our school communities that really allow some of those very special experiences for our kids to take place thanks to that fundraising. Book fairs are happening. That often coincides with Parent-Teacher Conference Week. It makes it convenient. So as our families are in the schools, they're also visiting the book fair. I know when I had children this age, this was a huge draw and something they looked forward to every year. So a shout out to all of our media specialists and parent volunteers who are making this happen across the district. We have been celebrating homecoming 3 weeks in a row. We started with Franklin. They were our kickoff and our early homecoming. You'll see our king and queen who were crowned at homecoming in Franklin. The students often take a senior picture in the center, one of the center hallways at each of our high schools. That's a tradition. And they had 90 POM alumni come back for homecoming night. And I'm going to tell you, it was impressive. We'll move on to Stevenson. Stevenson is our only high school that still continues the float tradition. So I don't know about you, but I remember using a lot of Kleenex to make those little tissue paper flowers and put them on floats. And so that creativity is still happening. And the Global Ed float, which was a really neat float, won that evening first place. And they had a roaring pep assembly during the day, and the freshmen came out victorious as far as their pep and spirit. So that was a great time at Stevenson. And then just this Friday, we rounded out Churchill's homecoming fun as well. So you know the Churchill band and drumline are always a draw. And here's the senior picture that was taken during the day, and the king and queen who were crowned at the game. So it was a chilly night, but it was a lot of warm hearts and a lot of huge smiles. So it was always wonderful to welcome back alumni. There were staff who had retired who were there, and students who had come back, as well as just a great crowd. They were playing against Stevenson, and so that always fills a stadium when you have a crosstown rivalry going on. Speaking of use of our fields, it's been great to have our LJAL friends out there. So they have been utilizing each of the fields of generally where they're in general where their home high school would be. So Franklin, Stevenson, and Churchill all hosted the Blue Jays and the Orioles, the Falcons and the Eagles. And it's just a neat experience for our little ones to cheer on the sideline, to play football on the field, to do a palm routine out on the fields and the track. So it's always great to have them and their families in our stadiums. So we want to take a minute and, of course, always share this important information of the competitive edge. You see a picture here of the check being given last June to a couple of our graduates who may look familiar to you. And we have Lorna Durand, who is our immediate past president of the foundation. So this is just a special reminder for kindergartners. If you have not signed up for the competitive edge, a deposit will be made in a 529 account to start saving for your child for college, and then they will get a scholarship check upon graduation. So if you haven't signed up, please be sure to do that. And this weekend was Fall Family Portraits. The rain held off, so another huge thank you to Stacy Jenkins, who took pictures of 72 family groups from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Emily Thompson, who is Stacy's right hand in the communications department, and many volunteers, including our own Mrs. Jarvis, who is president now of the LPS Education Foundation. And how many did we have total come through?
About 150.
About 150 families had their portraits taken on Greenmead, and that is one of our fundraisers for the LPS Education Foundation. But it's a wonderful way to get some fall family portraits, and just a huge thank you to our wonderful photographers and also all the volunteers. So we're going to share some kudos and some other congratulations from around the district. We had a Stevenson golfer, Grace Breeze, shot an 85 and took the silver medal at the regional championship, and she went on to states. She is the only Spartan in recent history to go to states 4 years in a row. So congratulations to Grace, and I believe that her nickname is Breezy, which certainly makes sense based on her last name. And the SHS lady golfers are city champs, city tournament champs, KLAA East division champs, and regional runner-ups. So congratulations to our top golfers. And Coach of the Year, recently you may have heard that the Churchill boys tennis coach, Denise Berg-Grant, was named Regional Coach of the Year for Regions 1 through 3. So Denise has been a longtime coach for boys and girls tennis at Churchill, and she also teaches physical education at Buchanan and Niji-Iro. So a big congratulations to her. And we want to congratulate Franklin High School senior class president Emma Apap for receiving a $1,000 grant from the PAD project to provide feminine products at no cost in the girls' restrooms at Franklin. And she was named Student of the Week at Franklin for her efforts. So thank you, Emma, for applying for the grant and for this great project. And we have some marching patriots here from Franklin. They earned Class B awards for Best Music and Visual Performance, Color Guard, Percussion, and overall Class B champions recently at Southfield Anderson High School. So a huge shout out to them and to the work that they continue to do. It's always one of the highlights for me when we attend Friday night games. And we're going to move on to Churchill Band, also doing phenomenal things. They earned a Division I Superior rating at the MSBOA District 12 Marching Band Festival. So you see them here on the field, and again, doing a fantastic job. So congratulations to our marching band and to Mr. Van Ham. And you may have heard, but the Livonia Warriors and Tyros team, all-girl pilot teams, went to Grand Rapids. They competed and won the entire championship. They formed an alliance at the end. I believe it was the Tyros team that made it in. They formed an alliance with the Livonia Warriors. So the Tyros are our 9th graders. The Livonia Warriors are our 10th through 12th graders. And they won the entire championship. And a huge congratulations to senior Melissa Barbat, who was one of the recipients of a first scholarship for the weekend. So congratulations to our robotics. I know they are anxious to get into their new space, and we are excited about creating it. So we had a Prep Athlete of the Week. Franklin senior Mark Ayers was voted Hometown Life's Prep Athlete of the Week after a win versus a Crestwood player during the Patriots' recent 6-2 victory. So our tennis team has done a phenomenal job this season. And if any of you listen to Jay Towers in the morning, you may have heard about Mrs. Amy Weiner. She was the Teacher of the Week. Acknowledged she is one of our ESTs at Randolph Elementary. She's in charge of our academic interventions and does a phenomenal job. She's a longtime member of our LPS staff family, and so congratulations to her for being honored. I believe she was the first Teacher of the Week for the new school year. And we're going to run through these last few quickly. Just mark your calendars. This week is parent-teacher conferences at the high school level. So last week, thank you to all of our parents who joined us and all of our staff who prepared for those all-important times together with families. And this year, parents at both levels are being offered an option of virtual or in-person. So this week is secondary. And we have 2 can't-miss productions coming up. So the Franklin Players are presenting Clue at the end of the month, which will be perfect just before Halloween. And then Kappa is presenting Legally Blonde mid-November. And so I think both will be audience favorites. And so please mark your calendars. And remember, you can go right onto those QR codes and get your tickets. You can even pick your seat. So please check those out. It is absolutely amazing. I can't tell you how much not only the students who are on the stage do, but all the students behind the scenes that work on the crew, that work in the theater tech class, all of the volunteers, costumes, practices. They put a tremendous amount of time in, so I know they love to have appreciative audiences there, as do our music folks, so just marking calendars. And we always include these updates on the website, so don't worry about writing these down. This update, Mrs. Jenkins will be on our website, but we have lots of fall concerts coming up. These are a few of the ones at Stevenson. And we have the Candy Dash coming up. I mean, could anything sound more fun? You might have to walk a mile path or a 5K dash. Either way, I think there's candy in it for you at the end. That's going to be Saturday, October 29th from noon to 3. So that will be held at Franklin. That's their for their PTSA, one of their fundraisers. And then finally, we have the LPS Education Foundation Luncheon. This annual luncheon helps to fund the competitive edge scholarship that we mentioned earlier. So if you're able to join us, anyone in the community is welcome. It'll be on Tuesday, November 29th at St. Mary's Cultural and Banquet Center. They are wonderful hosts and have been partners with us for many, many years. And the guest speaker is Rochelle Riley, a former Detroit Free columnist. I think that is it. Thank you for all the time to let us share the highlights. There's so many things to be proud of our students, our staff, our parent community. Amazing things going on out there, and just a tremendous start to the year. So thank you, President Burton.
Terrific. Thank you very much. At this time, we are going to take a brief 5 to 10 minute recess to congratulate our honorees of the evening, and we will be back and continue the rest of our meeting. We're now at recess. continuation of the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education regular meeting of October 17th, 2022. If you're just now tuning in, you've missed some wonderful accolades for 3 of our Churchill High School students who saved 2 residents from a house fire in their neighborhood. If you haven't heard some of the details of it, rewind our meeting or catch it tomorrow by the time it's uploaded and watch that. It's pretty special. We're on to the rest of our meeting. The next item on our agenda is item 3C, written communications. I do not have any written communications. Does any other board member have written communications to share with the board? Seeing none, item 3D is response to prior audience communications. I do not have any. And item 3E is audience communications. I do not have any blue slips. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to participate in audience communications? No. Alrighty, seeing none. We're on to the consent agenda, which is item 4 on our agenda. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Bradford.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda items as recommended by the superintendent. 5A, minutes of the regular meeting of September 26th, 2022.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Bradford, Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mr. Centers. Does any board member wish to have this item taken off of the consent agenda for further discussion before we vote on it? All right. Seeing not, we have a motion for the consent agenda. Motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mr. Centers. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield? Oops, Mrs. Bonifield's not here today. President Burton?
Yes, and that motion
Sorry about
passes.
that.
And I apologize, I just realized that my microphone has been off for the
Oh,
last
no.
few minutes, so
Calling out.
I don't think there's anything that wasn't heard that we could, that we need to go back on. I think we're all right. The next item on our agenda is item 6, business matters. 6A is the approval of Dickinson abatement. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mr. Johnson.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the recommendation to appoint the contract award for abatement at Dickinson Center to Quality Environmental Services, Beaverton, Michigan, for a total cost of $310,200, which includes contingency, and authorize the superintendent or her designee to negotiate and execute final contracts on behalf of the Board of Education.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And we'll hear from Mr. Francis on this item.
Thank you, President Burton. The recommended vendor was the low responsible bidder in an open public bid process, and we do recommend them. They went through a post-bid interview process with the team, as well as reference checked, and the owner's representative, Plant Moran Cressa, has worked with this company in other districts. LPS has not worked directly with them, but based upon all of the information that we've gathered and the interview we had with them and the recommendations of others, we do trust that they can completely handle this job. So we do recommend them to you. And as mentioned in the recommendation and resolution, that amount does include a 5% contingency. And this is for the hazardous abatement at Dickinson Center.
Alrighty. Are there comments or questions from the superintendent or other board members? And we're going into a series right now of items that we discussed at length last week in our committee of the whole meeting. Seeing no further questions on this item, we have a motion for approval of Dickinson abatement. Motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item 6B, approval of RTA roof designs. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mr. Centers.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the recommendation to award the contract for roofing design and construction services for Kennedy Elementary, Webster Elementary, and Coolidge Elementary to Roofing Technology Associates, Ltd., Livonia, Michigan, in the amount of $117,900, and authorize the superintendent or her designee to negotiate and execute final contract on behalf of the Board of Education.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mrs. Bradford. Mr. Francis.
Thank you again. This is a professional service between Roofing Technologies Associates and Livonia Public Schools. We have worked with RTA successfully, actually, for several years now. They began doing roofing design and construction administration for the district in 2018, specifically under this current program of roof replacements, but they've had an even longer relationship with the district. We have been very satisfied with the work that they've completed over the years, and thus far, we are desirable to work with them, and we recommend them for continued service.
Okay. Are there comments or questions from the board or the superintendent on this item? And Mr. Francis, again, for the benefit of the public who may not have tuned in for last week's discussion, this is, we are getting roof designs. We are not necessarily doing the work immediately, but we want to have this design work done so that when we get time, appropriateness in our budget, and good roofing prices, we'll be ready to go with the next projects that are coming down the road on this.
Yeah, very good clarification, and I'll just reiterate it, that this is for the professional service of design as well as construction oversight when we do the actual roofing. These are not roofers who have bid out a roofing project. This is for the architectural design of the roofs.
Okay, and then that has to be done before we go any further
Correct.
with it. But this is
Yes.
getting that first step ready. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we have a motion for approval of RTA roof designs. Motion by Mr. Centers and supported by Mrs. Bradford. Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item 6C, approval to purchase LMC Bookshelves 2021 bond. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the recommendation from the owner's representative, Plant Moran Cressa, to approve the purchase of bookshelves for library media centers at Cleveland Elementary, Rosedale Elementary, Riley Upper Elementary, Frost Middle School, and Franklin High School from NBS Commercial Interiors, Troy, Michigan, in an amount not to exceed $306,800, which includes contingency.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. Mr. Francis.
Thank you. These LMCs at these locations, these buildings that have been named, are slated to be renovated this next summer, the summer of 2023, via the 2021 bond initiative. They are the second phase of the bond renovations, and these bookshelves are specifically being ordered now, which is early, due to the anticipated lead times in the MediaTek furniture sector of furniture out there. And the manufacturers and our representatives have told us it would be best to start the ball rolling a little early. We did this in part during this last year, but we are doing this in an attempt to make sure that they arrive when the buildings are renovated and ready to go. So essentially, this is a purchase for next summer, and really as we come back in the fall, when those library media centers are completed, for the bookshelves specifically, we've realized and recognized a lag in. And also, with regard to this purchase, the pricing is from the National Cooperative Purchasing Alliance, and that does fulfill the board's requirement to bid.
Okay. Are there comments or questions from board members or the superintendent? No? All righty. We have a motion for approval to purchase LMC bookshelves from the 2021 bond. Motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis and Mrs. Bradford. Would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item 6D, approval of financial statements for the 2021-2022. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the 2021-2022 audit report as presented by the audit firm of Plant Moran.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mr. Centers. And Mrs. Smith, good evening.
Thank you, President Burton, and thank you to the board. Thank you for the time last week that we had to go over our financial statements and to answer questions that you had. I did have an answer to one question that was asked last week. It was about the MIPSR's pay down and when that would be complete. It's still targeted for 2038. So that was just a year less than it was the prior year. So with that, it's my pleasure. Did I mention, if anybody watching at home would be interested, last week at the committee meeting, we did have the opportunity to go over our budget to actual for 21-22. So if people are interested to go back and hear the dialogue, we went through each line to go over where the differences came in. And then we went over the financial statement. So Tom Marchese from Plant Moran, our senior manager at Plant Moran, has come back again this week to go over some highlights from our financial statements. So with that, I will turn it over to Tom.
Thanks, Allison.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me tonight to present the results of the 2022 financial statement audit. We have a slide deck prepared, and I'll just open up with a couple of high-level comments on what we do, what our audit entails, and basically the culmination of our audit, which is our opinion on the financial statements and the federal awards. So my name's Tom Marchese, as Allison so kindly introduced me. I'm a senior manager with Plant Moran, and basically I lead a team out at the district for a number of weeks. Our field work and interim work stretch over the course of several months, and our work involves risk assessment, planning procedures, in order to identify areas that we need to find evidence to support the financial statement balances as they're asserted by management. Further, we'll look at the federal awards to make sure that programs and expenditures to those programs that we deem major are supported and allowable under federal compliance requirements. So with that, a couple of the larger balances that we typically look at would be confirmation of cash balances, investments, the state aid receivables for July and August. We'll make sure that those are stated appropriately. We'll look at the payroll accruals, the liabilities, just to make sure that those are completely stated based on subsequent disbursement tests that we perform. And we'll also just make sure that based on sampling of transactions that those federal award expenditures comply with federal requirements and restrictions. So once we bring all of that work together, we're able to provide an opinion on the financial statements and the federal awards audit. So we're pleased to present an unmodified opinion on the financial statements and the federal awards audits. This year we tested Title I and ESSER as our major programs. This is a very high bar to obtain, and it's the highest level of assurance we can provide as the public accounting firm. So we'll start with just a few of these slides, and the first one we have here is the governmental funds balance sheet. So this table represents all of the fund level activities for the school district. The general fund assets were $73 million, the liabilities were $39 million, and fund balance was $32.8 million. Major funds this year were the general fund, special education fund, and the 2021 bond series 1 fund. So you'll see within the fund equity segment classification called assigned under the general fund column, and that represents an expected use of fund balance in fiscal year 23 where budgeted expenditures are greater than the initially projected revenues. So that's a planned use of fund balance for fiscal year 23 that must be assigned at fiscal year end 22. You'll see that the fund balance within 2021 bond series 1 fund is $65 million, and that fund balance is restricted for capital expenditures and will continue to decrease over time as the bond proceeds are expended. So the next slide we have is the budgetary comparison schedule, and this slide demonstrates the district's budgetary precision. You can see on the far right we have the budget variance column. Typically, you'll note sound budgeting practices range from 1% to 3%. you can see at the far right, for expenditures, the district's within 1% of budget compared to where they actually landed. This is indicative of sound budgeting practices and is a testament of the quality of forecasting performed by the business office. One point to note, this data is general fund activity excluding the funded projects activity, and we'll go into more what the funded projects activity is on the following slide. So the next slide here shows the general fund in totality. So this would include the funded projects activity. The funded projects activity is, it would include your funded projects such as Title I, special education, ESSER dollars, and coronavirus relief fund spending. So typically, districts throughout Michigan have this approach to accounting for as a means to track grants with spending restrictions and compliance requirements. So this is the approach that the district has used in prior years, and it's no different, but we just wanted to make sure that we're showing the breakout between the previous slide, which is in the far left column, plus the funded projects fund, which gets to the total general fund balance of $32.8 million. So you can see that the total general fund balance decreased $284,000 with the funded projects activity. One other point to note, we'll go into the trends of the district in a subsequent slide. One of the ways the state measures the financial health of districts across Michigan would be your fund balance percentage as a percent of expenditures. And basically the MSBO guidelines, the Michigan School Business Officials, would suggest 15 to 20% fund balance as a percent of your expenditures. Livonia Public Schools at June 30, 2022 holds an 18% fund balance. So the statewide average as of June 30, 2021, which is the most recent available data that we have out there to look back to, the statewide average was 19%. You'll also note that the fund balance percent as a percent of expenditures, with the ESSER dollars being included, there's more spending that has occurred this year compared to prior years with those federal funding dollars. So while the general fund only decreased $284,000, the fund balance percent decreased from 19 to 18% because of that additional spending. So the denominator changed, increased to reduce that percent. This pie chart provides the general fund revenue. So again, excluding the funded projects activity, general fund revenues were about $158 million for fiscal year end 22. The largest portion of funding comes from the state and makes up 73% of general fund revenues. This includes the state's portion of the foundation allowance, as well as other categorical funding. The next largest component would be your local revenue. This consists primarily of property taxes. General fund expenditures came in at $157 million, and this pie chart breaks them out by object type. So as you would expect with an organization where people are the biggest resource, the largest components of the expenditures will be your salaries and benefits. Salary and benefits, which include your health care and retirement cost, comprise 89% of the total expenditures. And this is reasonably consistent with prior years. If you look at the full accrual, the government-wide statements, you'll see that one of the biggest numbers relates to your MIPSR's liabilities. So this is the retirement system that the teachers will participate in and receive their pension and healthcare benefits from. At a state level, the retirement system's unfunded portion, plan assets do not meet plan liabilities. So plan liabilities exceed plan assets, which causes this unfunded portion of the retirement system. That unfunded portion is allocated to districts throughout Michigan, and the district's proportionate share of that liability is about $372 million for fiscal year 22. So a couple things to note, this does not impact the fund level for the district, and nearly all districts in Michigan will show a deficit net position due to their incorporation of this liability within their financial statements. Another point to note is that the reporting of this liability generally does not impact the district's bond ratings. Slide 8 illustrates the impact of GASB 68 and 75 on the government-wide versus fund level. You'll see the $372 million on the government-wide side, and then on the fund level, there is no impact. So just to point that out, you see the large deficit of $236.6 million versus the fund level fund balance of $112 million. Moving to slide 9, we have the general fund balance as a percent of expenditures. And this just shows the trend at the district for the last 5 years. And you'll see that for the last 5 years, the district's been at or around the MSBO target of 15 to 20%. As I mentioned earlier, the district's at about 18% at fiscal year end 22. And just to emphasize some of the importance of fund balance, fund balance is the district's excess assets, well, assets that are greater than their liabilities. So it's equity, essentially, at a district. And having fund balance or an ample amount of fund balance just allows the district to withstand cuts without being in a reactionary mode and impacting students potentially, which is further important in times of uncertainty. It improves the bond ratings at a district. It allows the district to operate without borrowings and further keeps money in the classrooms without paying interest expense. So the fund balance, having sufficient amounts, will afford the district flexibility amidst this uncertainty, particularly in these inflationary times and with potential recessionary conditions looming. The final slide just provides an update as of fiscal year end 22, the federal funding related to the pandemic that remains available and amounts that have been awarded to date and expended to date. So you'll see that ESSER 3 on the left axis here, we have the different categories of the pandemic funding. And you'll see that the largest chunk unspent is ESSER 3, and that availability period runs until September 30th, 2024. And the total amounts that have been awarded are about $10 million versus district expenditures to date of about $1.1 million. So the district has until 2024 to expend those amounts. The last item to point out is just noting that since the pandemic had begun, the district's received $24 million in federal awards, and this is finite, non-recurring revenue. This is expiring revenue. So it's very crucial that the district plans without this being continued or recurring going forward. So that concludes my presentation, and I feel bad I did not offer the opportunity for you all to interject with questions along the way here, but feel free to ask any questions.
All righty. Thank you very much for the presentation, and as you said, we went into a whole lot more detail last week, but this is a great overview of the highlights of what we needed to hear and that we need to make sure that the public can hear. Are there comments or questions from the superintendent or board members? Mr. Centers.
So basically, if someone were to be watching this and wanted a gist of it, our procedures are both strong because there was no material findings, and our fund balance is also healthy. So overall, good. It's a good assessment of the district, and things are going well. Is that right?
As I said, Mr. Centers, I think you captured all the key points. So as part of our planning and risk assessment processes, we'll look at internal controls at the district just so we're comfortable with the basis that management has for providing these financial statement figures and that they're capable of following compliance requirements. So with that, we're happy to report there were no findings, there are no internal control items or matters that we had noted in our report. And as I said, the compliance report was an unmodified opinion, which is the highest level that we can provide.
Other board members? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Burton, and thank you, Mr. Marchese, for being here. Thank you for last week with the in-depth discussion that we had. For someone looking at, and I'm referring to page 4 of the slides under the Funded Projects Fund, can you give us an idea as to how you spend more in the Funded Projects Fund than you get funded into that fund?
Sure. So I believe what you're referring to is the excess of expenditures over revenue.
Correct.
And there's 877,000. So what that is symptomatic of are accounting requirements where if funding is not received by the district within a 60-day period, it has to be unavailable. So it's essentially a timing difference, and that 877,000 will flip next year. So the funded projects fund is traditionally break even, and you have expenditures that cover the revenues over time.
Great, thanks for the explanation, appreciate it.
Sure.
Other board members or the superintendent? I just wanted to reiterate too that you had said that we are within 1%, which kudos to Mrs. Smith, the finance department, but also to all of the staff. Because a lot of folks in the district do have responsibility for spending certain amounts of money. And as we've said last week, I don't know any household budget that comes in within 1%, let alone something as large as the budget that we've got to work with in the school district. But thank you to Mrs. Smith and to the finance department staff and to the entire staff that has any responsibilities that fall in that. It is nothing that we take for granted, but it's something that consistently Livonia Public Schools comes in right around that number, which is what the target is. And we're thrilled that we do. Again, I just wanted to reiterate that we are grateful to be in a position where we have an 18% fund balance. It was in 2008 where we had and you mentioned we want to have that because there could be cuts, especially as we look at a potential recession. In 2008, we had an unexpected October cut of $462 per student. And many of us were here for that. And that may not sound like a lot to someone listening from the public, but it equated to millions that we had to cut out of our budget once the school year had already begun. And that was, of course, to the 2008 recession, which was devastating on a lot of individuals and industries. But we want to have that fund balance. I'm thrilled that we have it within the recommended range. During that recessionary time, we spent down our fund balance to keep cuts out of the classroom. And it got as low, and it did throughout the entire state of Michigan. I believe we went down to about as low as 2% in order to try to keep some of that recession from affecting our students. But had we not had that fund balance, and we had it at the appropriate 15 to 20% prior to 2008, but had we not had that, we would have seen even more devastating cuts than we had to experience. So I'm thrilled that the entire staff has worked together to build that fund balance back up. We are so very grateful to our community for the passage of things such as the Wayne County Enhancement Millage, which has assisted in building that fund balance back up to the healthy state that it's in right now. And it just as much as any household needs to have an emergency fund, we need to have that fund also in order to make sure that when things happen, because unexpected things happen, and especially as we're looking at a recession, we just don't know exactly what the next few years may bring to us in terms of state funding. So we certainly hope that it continues on the trend that it's on, but we can't run a school district on hope. We need to also have responsible fund balance there to take care of emergencies as they come up. But as I said, most of us who are in this room have lived through that, and we realize how important it is. So thanks to Mrs. Smith and the finance staff and the entire staff for building us back up into a strong financial position again.
I was just going to hop in there because you're right, that was a great example, and we've even had more recently with in 2020. You'll recall we were getting estimates from the state that with the pandemic starting, sales taxes were down, people were staying home. With the schools being funded from sales tax, they were telling us to prepare for a $650 per pupil cut. Because we had the fund balance, we could wait. we could see, are the actuals going to come in better than the estimates? And thankfully they did. We still saw a cut, but it was something that our fund balance could absorb, and we didn't have to be reactionary. We could wait and see. And so that's another benefit of having that fund balance. And I'll take the opportunity to thank our community. Another huge resource is our Wayne County enhancement millage, and also the passage of our bond and our sinking fund. It's because of that community support that we can keep our general fund dollars in the classroom, and that we have had this opportunity to build a stable financial base so that we can weather whatever comes our way. So thank you to the LPS community for that.
Absolutely. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank our previous superintendent, Dr. Randy Liepa, who worked alongside with many of the folks in this room, but utilized his expertise in guiding us through many years of really, really lean funding for education, and still kept Livonia Public Schools on strong footing. It was with his leadership that we survived as well as we did through those years. So thank you, Dr. Liepa. I don't think he's watching tonight. We'll pass that on to him later. I hope he's not watching. I hope he's doing something else tonight. Any other comments from any other board members or the superintendent? Again, Mr. Marchese, thank you so very much for the work of your entire team. An audit for a district this size sounds like a really huge, daunting task, but we are so grateful that you folks do it, and do it so well and so thoroughly, and that we have every confidence that it's done well, that it's done right. So,
Well,
thank you.
Thank you to the district for allowing us to continue to serve, and it's a pleasure to work with Allison and her staff.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a motion right now, motion for the approval of the financial statements. Let me see here. If I just make, I'm going to leave it as this, but let me see here. What we are really voting on, and when we read the motion itself, it's acceptance of the financial statements. I just now noticed it says approval of the financial statements. But the motion itself reads, move that the Board of Education of Livonia Public Schools accept the 2021-22 audit report as presented by the audit firm of Plant Moran. I just wanted to point that out. So the motion itself, the title reads approval of financial statements from 2021-22. Motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mr. Centers. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. President Burton.
Yes, and that motion passes. Thank you, folks, and thanks again, Mr. Marchese. Thank you, Allison. The next item on our agenda is item 7, instruction matters, and 7A is section 98C, learning loss grant. Don't know that we have a motion on that. I don't believe that we do. Yes.
It is an informational item that is required as an element of the grant, and Mrs. O'Brien will be presenting on that item.
Terrific.
Thank you, President Burton. I just wanted to take a minute and share with you a little bit about this grant. Dr. Terriel and Ms. Smith and I will be applying for this grant. It's from the Michigan Department of Education, Section 98C Learning Loss Grant. And as a part of this grant, we are required to share with you our vision for this grant through sharing of a learning loss plan, which is aligned to our district priorities, specifically our priority of student achievement. So demonstrating a strategic commitment to student learning as evidenced by measurable growth and achievement for all students through consistent, rigorous, and engaging curriculum and instruction. So our LPS Learning Loss Plan, beginning this school year, we would like to use these grant funds to support our students that have learning gaps, in addition to supporting students with their current grade level course learning. This plan would be to provide leadership, training, and support in the area of multi-tiered systems of support across our district. We know that for a variety of reasons, including the pandemic, that more students have areas of need, and we want to provide schools with the leadership on how to utilize a multi-tiered system of support through a collaboration between the Academic Services Department and the Student Services Department. Our two departments attended training this past spring on how to build a system-wide model for supporting students. This model of support provides all students with access to additional instruction through a dedicated time during the school day, We provide this support during intervention time at the elementary and our piloting mascot time at our secondary schools. The power of the MTSS model is that it is linked to teachers' professional learning teams. As teachers utilize common assessments as data to guide their additional learning opportunities for students this year, we look forward to providing teachers with the leadership and training as they learn new ways to support their students. And this grant will provide us with the funds to grow this model district-wide. And so by the spring, we look forward to sharing with you the impact of this learning loss plan, what its impact on our students and their achievement is. So we have not yet applied for this grant, but part of the grant is sharing with you the learning loss plan.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Are there comments or questions from board members or the superintendent?
No, we appreciate the addition of this on the agenda. This was relatively new information that came to us. As you know, the state received dollars from at the federal level, as well as allocated dollars from the state budget in response to student needs following the pandemic. And just recently, the outline requirements for this grant were published, and one of the requirements was prior to submission, which is required by October 30th, you needed to present a general plan to your Board of Education prior to that time. So this was our only remaining meeting, so we appreciate the opportunity to get that in so that we can apply for this grant, which I believe will be totaling potentially over $400,000 to support these efforts. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you. Thank you, President Burton. How soon would we expect to hear whether we received the grant? Do we know that, or?
I do think they are working on a very tight timeline, and because these funds are for 21-22, I would expect to see it very soon, maybe as early as our January state aid, but I'm sure they will announce, I'm assuming it'll be approved,
Okay.
so I'm assuming to get that approval probably in the month of November. So.
Great, thank you.
Mrs. Smith? I think you said 21-22. Did you mean 22-23?
I did misspeak, thank
Okay.
you, yes, for
Okay.
22-23 already.
Well,
Can you
there's so many,
believe it?
yeah, there's so many of these relief dollars that have fluctuated over that few-year period. It's understandable. Alrighty, but regardless, they wanted, those are funds that are intended to be used during this school year.
Yes.
Well, then, yes, it does need to happen quickly.
Yes.
Okay, alrighty. Thank you for the update on it.
Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns on this item? No, comments? Alrighty, next item is our item 8, personnel matters, and 8A is teachers for approval. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mr. Johnson?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and offer employment for the 2022-23 school year to the teachers listed on the attached document.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Acosta. Mr. Abate?
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much. So the prospective new staff members we're presenting to the board this evening have been selected to fill our needs in the areas of special education, GSRP, health sciences, early childhood education, visual impairment, and general elementary instruction. They are well qualified to fill these positions and have been fully vetted through our interview process. We're very confident they will perform at a high level and represent Livonia Public Schools in a manner that is consistent with our shared vision and collective commitments. These positions have also been included in the 2022-2023 budget, and we're pleased to be recommending these talented professionals to join our LPS family. With your approval, we are excited to have them working with our students.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments from board members or the superintendent? No? Yes, absolutely. Welcome to the LPS team. Seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. Johnson for teachers for approval, supported by Mrs. Acosta. Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes. And that motion passes. The next item is 8B, teachers for recall. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mr. Centers?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and recall to district employment as a teacher for the 2022-23 school year, the person listed on the attached document dated October 12, 2022.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And Mr. Abate.
Yes, we were happy to make this recall to fill a position in ELA. We do have 5 members of our staff that remain on recall from the start of the year. As always, we look for opportunities to bring everyone back if we possibly can, and we'll continue looking for those, and when they do come up, we'll be reaching out to our folks.
Terrific. Thank you. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, we have a motion for teacher for recall. Motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. President Burton?
Yes. And that motion passes. The next item is item 7C, teachers for tenure. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and acknowledge that tenure status has been granted to the following teachers, effective on the respective date: Alina Pasco, October 11th, 2022; Maria Palafsidis Tracy, October 17, 2022; Samantha Slack, September 5th, 2022; Grace Suchen, September 27th, 2022; Robert Voss, October 5th, 2022; Paige Young, October 21st, 2022.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Bradford. Mrs. Keats.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
So our teachers for tenure on this agenda have successfully completed the district's requirements for probationary teachers, including years of service, evaluations, overall performance, and documentation of student growth. We have carefully reviewed all supporting materials along with the recommendations of our building administrators and have verified they should be granted tenure status with Livonia Public Schools. We wish to offer our congratulations to these staff members on reaching this milestone and looking forward to their continued success with us.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions from the board? Or superintendent?
Congratulations.
Yes, absolutely. Congratulations. It's a big accomplishment in their career. We have a motion for teachers for tenure. Motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item is item 8D, resignations. There's no need for a vote on that item. And the next item is item 8E, retirement. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolution of appreciation for services rendered by Lana McCall.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Keats?
Thank you. Tonight we wish to honor and congratulate one member of our LPS family who is retiring from her position with Livonia Public Schools. We'd like to thank Mrs. McCall for the many years of service she provided to the students of LPS since 1996. She gave support to nearly 8 school communities as well as human resources. So we certainly wish her the best in her next endeavor, and we ask the board to adopt the attached resolution of appreciation.
Terrific, thank you. Are there comments or questions from the superintendent or board members?
We just want to wish Lana the very best. We had the opportunity to work closely with her over the years, but especially during her time here at central office. So we are very happy for her. We will miss her and wish her the very best.
Absolutely. Comments from other board members?
Congratulations.
Absolutely, and as we say each time when we have retirements, it's with such mixed emotion. We're happy for our folks who get to go on to the next chapter of their lives, and yet we're sad because almost always it just leaves a huge hole. We are a people serving people organization, so when one of our people are not going to be here any longer, it creates a hole, and they're very missed. I know Lana will be very, very missed, touching that many lives with that many students throughout our district. So thank you so much for your years of service, and we wish you a wonderful retirement. We have a motion right now for retirement, motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mr. Johnson. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item 9, hearing from board members. Are there any board members who have anything that they would like to share at this time? Nope, we don't tonight. Next, well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. We are at our adjournment. We wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you for tuning in with us. And we are off next week. It's just a board workshop. We are not having a meeting. We hope you have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Good night.